Hi, you're listening to Chipset, a podcast from Intel where we talk about technology. You'll hear from experts both inside the company as well as those who work with Intel to create great things. I'm Marcus Yam, technology evangelist, and this episode is about Rocket Lake. That's the codename of Intel's 11th Gen Core desktop processors. These are the CPUs that will be in many of the gaming and creator desktop PCs you'll see this year. To learn more, I spoke with Marcus Kennedy, General Manager of the Gaming and eSports segment in Intel's PC business. It was a fun conversation with many nostalgic moments about what got us into gaming, what keeps Marcus playing Counter-Strike even after all these years, and just how many frames per second are enough. And of course, Rocket Lake. Welcome, Marcus.
Thanks, Marcus. It's going to get weird real fast if we keep doing that.
I think this is going to be a great episode, right? You know, combining Marcuses. I love it. So, tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do at Intel?
The general manager title is really just a fancy way of saying that we have to talk a lot to people and convince people that, that we're doing the right stuff for products. And so luckily I get to do that relative to gaming and gaming PCs and esports. So I get to act like I'm making decisions and guide a business to go delight a billion gamers out there in the world. So kind of an exciting space to be in.
Awesome. And how many years have you been with the company?
Oh man, it'll be 15 years. Actually, wait, hang on. Yeah, 15 years on Friday. Is my 15th year anniversary at this company, and I guess through that 15 years, I've been in. I started in manufacturing and kind of moved around to engineering and engineering management. I shifted over to finance, did some stints in business and strategy and marketing, silicon planning, all before I kind of backward fell into this job.
Okay, so I mean that's a lot of experience. What's been your favorite role at Intel?
Ooh, is it okay if I say this one? And, I'm pretty sure my boss is going to listen to this, so I really don't mean that as kissing up, but I honestly think this is my favorite job. I mean, as an avid gamer, a former professional gamer, and, somebody who actually really likes to touch and feel the products that we make and put out the door and change the world, I couldn't think of a better place for me to be in at this company. And though I've had a lot of great jobs and worked with a lot of great people, I really, truly, honestly believe that this is my favorite job.
Well, I mean, they say work isn't always all fun and games, but if you're leading the gaming segment, I guess sometimes it is.
That's true. I'm going to start using that. I'm going to steal that one.
So you said, you mentioned professional gamer, and you also work on the esports side. Tell me about, your professional gaming experience.
Yeah, I was a professional gamer before it was cool, but certainly before they became $1 million contracts and all that stuff. And maybe I might not be in this job had I been a professional gamer now. So I grew up in arcades, right? Playing Street Fighter. You see a Street Fighter thing back there. Mortal Kombat in arcades. My dad would give me $5 at a putt golf and games, and I'd spend a whole Saturday making 30 tokens last the whole time. So I competed because it was the only way I could spend my time, and I had to make those 30 tokens last. But so I grew up playing fighting games in arcades, and then that led to me kind of building my own computers and doing first-person shooters at home. So I played Counter-Strike back in 1.3 and 1.4 in Source. Was really my first entry into real competitive gameplay. Built my computer, take it to LAN parties. And then much later in life, a few years down the road, I started playing Smash Brothers. And in the grassroots community there, I kind of helped build that up and became top ranked in the Smash Brothers Melee world, and got to fly around to play video games and get paid while I was working at Intel. Actually, I was on a compressed work week in manufacturing. So my front ends were working at Intel, my back ends were flying and playing Smash Brothers and Counter-Strike and Halo, which was the third game I would play. So.
No, that's amazing. I think we've played a lot of the same games. I just remember just loving Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat, and of course the best thing is if you want to be up next, you put your token on the corner of the machine because you got next up, right? And
absolutely.
Yep, and yeah, things have changed a whole lot. But so you've gone from like arcades to Nintendo consoles now to PC. Well, that's a good way to segue to talk about our new exciting processor, Rocket Lake. So let's talk about Rocket Lake. You know, what is Rocket Lake, and who is Rocket Lake for?
Well, what Rocket Lake is, I think, is probably the easier question to answer, right? It's our new 11th generation Intel Core processor, right, Series S, and which just means that it's powering the next generation of desktops. And who's it for? Well, that's a little harder to answer because, frankly, it's our best processor out for desktop. So it's for whoever wants great performance out of their desktop, right? And I'm the believer that at least in the gaming segment, gamers want performance, and so obviously we think that this is a great processor for performance. But creators also want performance, and so it's a great processor to power your creator desktop. And really, anybody who wants better performance out of their desktop should be getting and looking for a Rocket Lake system.
And and I know Rocket Lake is unique because it represents kind of a shift in our processor architecture and the way that we think about and the way that we design our processors. So comparing and Rocket Lake, we're using the code name because it sounds cool for 11th gen, but it's a pretty distinct difference between the previous generation, 10th gen Comet Lake, and Rocket Lake. And I do know that the 10th gen Comet Lake, we topped out at the Core i9s had 10 cores, whereas Rocket Lake has 8 cores. Can you tell me a little bit about that decision?
Yeah. So let me start actually with the first part you were talking about architecture, because it'll help answer the second part about 8 cores versus 10 cores. So first, the thing you got to know about Rocket Lake is it is on 14 nanometers, right? A 14 nanometer node, and we've been on 14 nanometers for a while, and that comes good and bad, right? The good about being on 14 nanometers for a while is that it's a finely tuned process, right? Our manufacturing folks know how to put out the best 14 nanometer products that we put through the factories. And what that translates into in terms of architecture is it translates into the best clock speeds, right? And so that's the number one thing. The second thing, though, and this is the kind of the bad about being on 14 nanometer in this case, is that what that means is that your transistors are a little further apart, which means that you can fit less of them onto a die, right, onto a wafer. And so what we did was we took a 10 nanometer process and ported it back onto 14 nanometer in order to kind of get the best of both worlds, right? We were able to maintain the highest clock speeds and the highest performance that our manufacturing folks can give us in the top bins, while bringing in some really cool architectural improvements that we're able to bring from 10 nanometer back onto the 14 nanometer. Now, what that means when you do that is it actually takes a little bit more room. And so going from 10 nanometer to 14 nanometer just means you can't fit as many into as many cores. And so 8 core was the best we could get at the optimal place of speed, performance, cost profile to get the architectural improvements that Rocket Lake had. So that's why we did 8 cores versus 10 cores. But they're eight. Frankly, they're 8 screaming cores, right? And with those cores, we're actually able to reach up to the same clock speeds that we had on Comet Lake. But because it's a new architecture, it leads to about 19% generation over generation IPC improvement, as well as some other really cool things that we've been able to bring over, like our integrated graphics, which is our Xe architecture, which is the first time that we're bringing Xe architecture that launched first with Tiger Lake onto desktop, among a couple other features that I think we'll talk about in a little bit.
Wow. Okay. So 5.3 gigahertz, right? That's the top end of Comet Lake, and we're reaching the very same with our new
Yep.
architecture with Rocket Lake.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit more about the effective architecture? I know the new one is called Cypress Cove, right? And
Yeah.
that kind of brings in some of the best of what we had with Ice Lake, and with graphics, we're having Xe coming in from Tiger Lake, two fantastic chips. What is that? What does a new architecture actually bring? What does it mean?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about the IPC improvement. So it might sound like, hey, they're just kind of matching up generation over generation when you say we're reaching the same clock speeds. But remember, the clock speeds are often determined by what you're able to get with your binning and manufacturing. And so the reason why that's true is because we stayed on 14 nanometer, which actually is a good thing for clock speeds. But because we're doing it on a 10 nanometer process that was backported, it just means better performance, right? So that 19% IPC improvement, and as you know, IPC, right, instructions per clock. What that really means is that even at the same clock speeds, you're able to just do more. Your workloads are able to run faster, and you're able to just get more out of your chip, because you have a new architecture that is able to run them faster, even at the same clock speeds, which is 5.3, which is, again, best in class, right? You can't get to that level of clock speed in the industry outside of Intel architecture. So that's first. The second thing you brought up was the integrated graphics, and one of the really cool things about this new Xe Intel integrated architecture, integrated graphics, is that bringing that into our Rocket Lake architecture really means that we're able to deliver up to 50% improvement on things like content creation and productivity as well. So when you look at those two things, increased IPC for single-threaded workloads, and you bring in the integrated graphics, and you bring that single-threaded performance over to content creation and productivity, we see performance gains gen over gen across the board.
11th gen also brings in a new generation of PCI Express. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a number of things that we're bringing with Cypress Cove here into Rocket Lake that we didn't have before on Comet Lake. So you touched on PCIe Gen 4 already. That's a really big one, right? This is our first desktop processor with PCIe Gen 4 lanes, and it'll have up to 20 lanes there for this one. We'll have up to DDR4 3200 support. We'll have enhanced media, enhanced display, a bunch of overclocking features like we always have. We'll have support for Resizable Bar, which would be great. And we've also introduced a number of AI capabilities as well, deep learning boost, VNNI support, stuff like that. The idea behind all of those things, by the way, is to just make sure that we're bringing as many of these capabilities to market as quickly as possible for desktop. We haven't been in Gen 4 in desktop, and so this is the first time we're doing that, and then that'll prepare everybody for the Gen 5 in the future as well.
Okay, so we're hitting Gen 4. Gen 5's around the corner, but does this mean that Gen 3 is all tapped out, or is there headroom still? Are we just way ahead of the game here in terms of
No,
PCI
we're not.
generation?
No, we're definitely not way ahead of the game. In fact, if we're being honest with ourselves, we might have even been a little behind, right, by maybe a few months to a year on Gen 4. And so it's great that we've got Gen 4 here. I think Gen 3 still has some legs. There's lots of applications and attach that operate just purely up to Gen 3. But Gen 4 just allows that attach to go faster, whether you're talking graphics or storage or whatever that you're using to attach to it. Gen 4 just rockets, excuse the pun, go straight past that.
So for those people who are thinking about bandwidth going over the PCI Express bus, I mean, what kind of devices really take advantage of PCI Gen 4, and which ones are still perfectly fine on Gen 3?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest one to talk about, right, is going to be your discrete graphics, right? I mean, we're talking gaming here, and so obviously that's the number one thing that hits that most people care about. So the Gen 4 and attaching that to your best discrete graphics card is going to be your best bet, and the best way to take advantage of those lanes.
Okay, well, discrete graphics, I know gamers definitely want to put those in their desktop systems. Earlier you talked about what the new integrated Iris Xe graphics brings to desktop and more Rocket Lake specifically. Why would we put such, I mean, admittedly great integrated graphics on mobile from Tiger Lake? Why concentrate on those on a desktop system where there's definitely going to be a discrete GPU?
That's a really good question. I'll answer it in two ways. First, it's that just from a simply speaking, right, having two separate graphics cards in your system, one integrated in the CPU package and one discrete, actually allows for greater performance efficiency, because depending on what workloads you're running, your system might decide, and it might be tuned to run on integrated versus on discrete. You might not need to power up that discrete card to run something pretty simple, whether you're browsing or whether you're watching something like Netflix, Hulu, or something else, right? Or even up to 4K, which is one of the things that this integrated graphics actually does really well, as opposed to even, say, entry discrete graphics cards. So let's say you were buying an entry gaming system, for example. You only had so much money to spend on an entry gaming card. You could still do 4K streaming with this Xe integrated graphics. So that's the first thing. thing. The second thing I'd say is that, talking about tuning, there are a lot of game developers out there that actually develop their games in ways that take advantage of where the graphics are. Sometimes they're fully GPU bound, but sometimes that GPU doesn't have to be discrete. Sometimes it'll actually look for integrated first because it's faster and the latency is lower to get there versus going all the way through your PCIe Gen 4 even all the way out into your discrete cards. And so sometimes it'll actually lead to smoother gameplay depending on what kinds of games you're playing, and sometimes lead to greater performance efficiency, and sometimes open up better experiences than you might have if you're running an intra gaming system.
Now, thinking back to Iris XE and what it brought to Tiger Lake, it had some pretty great, AI features too. Now, that's not the only thing. I know that the new architecture, Cypress Cove and Willow Cove, brought along some cool AI features. Does Rocket Lake get a lot of the same, AI benefits that they came with the other 11th gen processors?
Yeah, and actually, this is the first time that we're bringing these AI capabilities to our S series desktops. We've had it actually on our high end or high HE desktop line before in our workstations, but things like deep learning boost and VNNI commands and instructions actually do a lot for you in these systems. So from things like image classification or background blur removal, especially right now, when people are on video all the time and doing work from home stuff, you've got those blur images on your background. That's using a ton of processing power to make happen. And so with things like VNNI and deep learning boost, it actually helps with those to stop using so much of your system and your power. Those are a couple examples. A couple more. We've got speech recognition and language translation with GNI, and what those allow us to do are introduce things like I'll whisper mention it here that we're actually launching an Antitoxicity app for gamers that take advantage of the GNA, the acceleration that happens inside the silicon as well. So thumbs up on these AI integration on these capabilities. I actually think, when you add all these things together and you put that on top of the single-threaded performance and the IPC improvements that we talked about before, that combination is really what lets you actually start seeing some of the increases that we're seeing in some of these other applications, whether it's, productivity or content creation, both gen over gen and versus comp.
Oh, I've heard about that anti-toxicity app. That's super cool. And I from what I know, it uses that GNA, that's Gaussian Neural Accelerator, that's right on the XE graphics, and it's able to, very, very quickly, without using a lot of compute intensive power, because it is hardware accelerated, to analyze the speech and anti-toxicity. We're going to be taking out a lot of that hate speech and profanity in online games completely on the client side, right? This is anything that
That's right.
people can control on their own. There's no censorship, but it's definitely something that a user can control, and
That's right.
a benefit that someone will get running Rocket Lake S. So,
And one of the things I'll touch on that you just said, you talked about control. I believe this is so important. I think the desktop, the PC in general, but the desktop more than anything is a platform of customizability, a platform that puts, the power and control of an individual, of what you want your experience to be, in your hands, right? Versus taking it away from you and having it be really, curated and locked down and with all these walled gardens. And the design of this anti-toxicity app, to your point, it really follows that train of thought. It's not censorship, but it allows you to control what you hear, and the toxic kind of environment that sometimes comes, unfortunately, with our world of gaming, is the number one pain point for gamers who want to socially game with their family, with their friends, and all those other kinds of things. And so we're giving power back to the gamers to be able to turn that on or off so they can game as they choose.
oh, that makes a lot of sense, especially for Rocket Lake, something that gamers will definitely want to put in their new builds. Another thing you mentioned is Resizable Bar. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so the first thing to note is that this, it has to obviously be enabled by the partner vendors, right? We've done everything we need to do on our part for Rocket Lake Systems to go out and support this, but on motherboards that have been enabled to go do this, it's a partnership with NVIDIA that really allows us, the processor, to access the discrete graphics memory in a much more seamless kind of way, right? It allows you to access more of that VRAM, and so what that does is it reduces that latency between the processor and the discrete 2D graphics because you don't have to transfer as much. And when you are transferring it, it reduces the latency there. So what all of that translates into from a real world perspective is it just means that your workloads are going to run faster, right? And so if you have GPU bound workloads, as we know that that a lot of games are, then what you end up with is, again, smoother gameplay, a better performance, and less jitter, things like that with this system.
So, on the gaming desktop side, with enthusiasts, overclocking is always one of the big things that is a hallmark of Intel processors. What does Rocket Lake bring for overclockers?
Yeah, so I love this question, by the way. So overclockers are a community that's kind of near and dear to my heart. We talked a little bit about control and putting the power and control back into the user's hands, and really nowhere I think is that more clear than the overclocking community. I mean, these folks, and if you're listening, you folks, I just love how you just try to find every way possible to crank out as much performance as you can out of these processors and out of these boards and all the chipsets and everything that go with it. So just to touch briefly on this. So first, along with Wi-Fi 6 and Thunderbolt 4 and some of the other connectivity things that we've brought to market, again, you got to make sure that the motherboard vendor that you go with that is compatible. From an overclocking perspective, we actually have a few new enhancements and features. So first, we've got some memory things that we're bringing to bear this time around. I think Dan Ragland, our overclocking expert, did a chip chat with you guys a while ago and talked a little bit about this already. But for the first time ever, we are enabling for non-K SKUs memory overclocking up and down the stack. So this goes for B series, H series, or the top of the line Z series chipsets to actually enable memory overclocking. And of course, memory overclocking is one of these things that people have been asking for a while. So we listened to the community and made it happen. So that gives you just one more knob to turn to increase performance as you go. The second is AVX related. So we actually have with AVX2 and AVX512, you now have the ability to do offsets and voltage guard band overrides as well. And what that lets you do, right, it lets you just tune even more. You can crank up a little bit more, take on some of these AI capabilities with AVX512 in order to crank even that much more performance out of your system. And then last, right, we're obviously just enabling just an overhaul of the whole suite of everything that we have, including a new extreme tuning utility, right? A new version of that lets you really make it a little simpler to do all the stuff that we're talking about, and a nice new refreshed view, including an AVX disable enable option. Because for some of you out there, I know cranking up performance doesn't always have to come with a trade-off for cranking up wattage. And when you run an AVX 512, it's obviously going to run you a little hotter. You might not have the best cryo cooling technology out there, so this will let you actually turn it off and still get the gains from the overclocking without the AVX 512 gains as well. If you don't have the high end cryo cooling and stuff like that requires that. A couple extra things that we haven't talked about. The memory controller now has Gear 2 support in addition to Gear 1, which also allows you to, on average, reach higher average overclock frequency levels on these new processors than we had in the past. And then last, with compatible motherboards, which you'll always hear me say because it always has to be with compatible motherboards, you can make changes now to your DDR4 frequency in real time, meaning you can toggle now with the new utility between the boot frequency and the XMP profile one live in Windows. So with all of those cool things, what that lets you do is really gives you even more knobs, even more ways to tune, and a nice refresh utility to make it simpler and easier to do.
So for experienced overclockers, they will obviously love all these different knobs, and definitely that the ability to control, whether you're enabling AVX 512 or not, because it's like you said earlier, it brings all these great AI features. But if you don't need them and you want to use that extra headroom to scale your frequency, that's a great kind of
That's right.
knob to adjust.
That's
but
right.
For those people who don't really know all that much about overclocking, you did mention the Intel Extreme Tuning Utility, the XTU. And there's also the Intel Performance Maximizer, the IPM. So these tools, are they able to control, give the maybe the novice overclocker that type of control to be able to get the most out of Rocket Lake without really spending a whole lot of time learning a whole new You can really, I was saying you could really go down the rabbit hole by learning all about overclocking. But if you want to spend less time tinkering with your system and more time gaming, are the XTU and IPM just as good?
Yeah, I think so. And again, we're refreshing the XTU, making it even simpler. It is still a very technical tool, right? And so, now with nice YouTube videos like this one, you can learn a whole lot, and I think you can do it. But that's really for the main technical folks to really kind of dive deep. But if you want to spend a little bit of time learning that one, it's really good, and you don't really have to have a PhD in overclocking to use it, right? It's simpler, it's easier to use. But IPM really, or Intel Performance Maximizer, is really the one that I think if you go download it with just literally a couple of clicks, you can really, I think, get the most out of your system without having to worry about all those really fine tuning that the experienced overclockers really have. One final note that we haven't talked yet about, but there is backward compatibility here. So for those of you who don't want to upgrade to a 590 board or something like that, the 490 board, Rocket Lake is compatible with those as well, and backwards compatible. So you don't have to upgrade all the way. But and I will always say this again, like I said before, your best bet in order to get every benefit of every feature that we've been talking about here today, and make sure that you can crank out the best performance, you obviously want the best motherboard, and you want to go with the top of the line chipsets in order to get the most. So your Z590 on your best motherboards is the best way to get the most out of your Rocket League system.
Okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit more about that then. We talked a lot about features that are built into the Rocket Lake chip itself and the SoC, but let's help me separate what are the benefits of going to that 500 series board. And I think you mentioned a couple of those features, but let's break it down for me. What are the benefits of going with the latest chipset?
Yeah, I mean, so the main one that's I think the easiest to understand is overclocking. Just first and foremost, the Z590, right? The Z series chipsets are all about the CPU processor overclocking, right? This is what lets you kind of crank up, get using thermal velocity boost plus all these other things to get up to the 5.3, and even beyond. And for those of you who have like not just ambient, so not just your desktop just sitting in your room with the fans that have been delivered to it, right? But you actually open it up. You've got the kind of top of the line cooling technology. You can even get up to even I don't want to promise anything here, but beyond 5.3, because really your limits are really only in your thermals, right? Only how hot your system can run. And so we've put as much as we can and as much enabling into the Z590 and the motherboards that have it all enabled to be able to crank up as high as you can and remove all those guardrails possible so that you can get as much out of your system. And so the number one thing is CPU processor overclocking and cranking up as much as you can to get the highest clock speeds possible. The memory overclocking, as we talked about, is actually available on B and H now, not just Z, right? And so you don't need Z to have that, but the Z series are really where your CPU overclocking is. Now, there are a handful of other benefits to going up to the Z500 series as well. One example, right, is the 3.2 Gen 2x2 20 gigs, which increases the USB connectivity. So we're doubling connectivity speed on USB, right? There's DMI Gen 3.0, which doubles the bandwidth between the chipsets and the processor. And so, between the chipsets processor, we've increased how fast the data goes between those. I already talked about the PCIe Gen 4.0, and so our 500 series support that 4.0, whereas on your 490s, you might not get that support on the 4.0. There's a handful of motherboards out there that have figured out some ways around that. And we already talked about some of the other things like the discrete Wi-Fi 6E support and the Thunderbolt 4 support that you get on the 500 series.
So just better connectivity all around.
Yeah, it's faster, more performant, and lets you just get more out of your system across the board.
All right, so there's no shortage of new features coming with 11th gen Rocket Lake. What about for someone who just loves building PCs but is always on the bleeding edge of technology? What would you say to the person that has that 10th gen CPU, maybe even a Core i9 10 core CPU? What would you say to that person who's thinking about upgrading but not really sure what the benefits are?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually love Comet Lake systems. My last computer was a Comet Lake system, and I think that they're still great. but Rocket League is better. And we've talked quite a bit about the better IPC gains gen over gen. We've talked a bit about the new integrated graphics, PCIe Gen 4, faster connectivity, faster transfer speeds, all these other things with all these benefits. The 8 versus 10 core is a question that we get a lot, right? We talked a little bit about why we made the decision, but I would say to the person who's thinking about upgrading is, what kind of work are you trying to do? Even if you're trying to do more threaded workloads like content creation, things like photo editing, video editing, I'm of the opinion that Rocket Lake is still a better system, and the data that we're using, that we're seeing kind of come in from our testing shows that as we add in those AI features like we talked about, deep learning boost, OpenVINO, and you add that to the integrated graphics, and you add that to the fact that we've got better single-threaded IPC performance, you put all those things together, we still get better performance on Rocket Lake for multi-threaded applications, even with 8 cores versus 10 cores. And so, yeah, it's true that some applications, some things scale pretty linearly as you grow cores, and if you're into those sort of things, you're really kind of driving those, then maybe staying on Comet Lake is the right thing for you. But for every other application, for every other thing that you're trying to drive, whether it's single-threaded gaming, whether it's even some of those multi-threading applications like we talked about, I'm of the belief, and our testing is proving it, that Rocket Lake is still better.
Okay, cool. Well, so for anyone who's actually convinced and really wants to build a new system, now's kind of a strange time to be finding PC parts. It's really hard to find a GPU. Same with CPUs. What are our expectations for how easily it's going to be to get hands on a Rocket Lake CPU?
Yeah. So first and foremost, right? This space has just exploded. Nobody knew that the overall market was going to grow the way it did, right? I mean, it's been growing at a double-digit clip, but with COVID, and people staying more at home and then refreshing their systems, upgrading, wanting more power, wanting more applications, and actually buying more computers per person than we've ever seen in the history of this market. It's just led to just it's harder to find any of this stuff, right? That said, we are really confident with our Rocket Lake supply, and the reason why we're really confident is kind of this goes back to the 14 nanometer conversation we had before. Part of the reason we stayed there was because we wanted to make sure that we had as much supply as we possibly could, and so this launch is actually the most supplied launch that we've ever had with a desktop system. We have more processors ready to go than ever, and so we think that you'll be able to find whatever Rocket Lake processor you want. As we have been advocating for you to go buy it, we wanted to make sure you're going to be able to go buy it. Now, I can't speak for our partner supply or our competitor supply or anything like that. I'm not going to speak to any of those things, but relative to our CPU and our systems, we absolutely are confident in our manufacturing capacity and our ability to supply our partners.
All right, well that's great news. So for people who really want to get one, what's the date? When can we find them in stores or on retailer shelves?
Yeah, so March 16th is where you'll start to see some of this stuff, some of the news and things embargo. The end of this month will be when you'll be able to go ahead and pick them up. Though we are allowing some pre-sales through some channels right now.
Great. So you mentioned that your last build was a Comet Lake system. What are you gaming on these days?
Yeah, the thing I'm gaming on right now is a gaming laptop. Not a gaming desktop right now, but it's a gaming laptop with a Comet Lake in there. Like I said, an i7, and it's got a 2080 in there, and it runs. Like I said, Comet Lake's still a great product, and so it still runs a lot of the great games right now. But that's what I game on when I'm gaming on PCs. So I play, Counter-Strike Source. Come see me if you want to get shot in the head with a Desert Eagle. Or I like Three Kingdoms. It's a great series, and I'm playing through that right now. And the Avengers game, which is a fantastic game, and as you can see behind me, right, I'm a big comic book fan, so I really enjoy playing the Avengers as well. In addition to all the other stuff that I play with my kids, right? So we'll play Smash Brothers still, Ultimate with my kids, or Mario Kart and stuff like that. And I'm replaying Final Fantasy X again, remastered on the PS4 because I just can't get enough of Final Fantasy games.
Part one. No, that's cool. So okay, so all this talk about desktops, I have to ask. I mean, again, that Comet Lake gaming laptop with that GPU is legit, but Why the laptop? Why not a desktop?
Well, just to be perfectly honest, I've been waiting for Rocket Lake, and I know that sounds like a plug. I know it does, but I mean it. So I figured with the gaming laptop, I could it could kind of hold me over until Rocket Lake came out, and so I'm literally going to be building my next computer next month.
And I'll have to say, sometimes I game on a laptop too, and the big reason why I like that is that it's easy to move around. So I see you got that TV behind you. Honestly, it's a lot easier to move a laptop and hook it up to the HDMI to the TV than it is.
It is. It is.
Desktop.
And the good thing about some of these gaming laptops, especially with like Comet Lake and some of the work that we do on the platform, is they're pretty well balanced, right, between power and performance. And so you don't have to keep it plugged in all the time if you don't want to. And so it actually works. It actually works pretty well. But again, I'm biased to all the tuning and the cranking and all that stuff, and you can't get out of a gaming laptop the kind of performance you can get out of a gaming desktop. And so I've been waiting for Rocket Lake to come out so I could crank that bad boy. I'm trying to break 6 gigahertz, man. That's what I want. So that's where I'm going.
Are you going to use any special cooling?
I am. So I'm going to use the Intel Cryo cooling technology, which we launched as well. So that plus Rocket Lake plus the best graphics card that I can find that's on the market, and then just crank that bad boy up.
Okay, so for those who don't know, we're going to go back to that overclocking side. I have to ask, cryo cooling. For those people who haven't heard of cryo cooling, what is it?
Yeah, so I'll touch on this briefly, but please go look it up. Google Intel Cryo Cooling, and you will find everything that you want on this stuff. But really, what it is, it's really cool technology that you can place inside your desktop build that allows you to run at near ambient temperatures. And with that, plus all the other cool stuff that we've got with the tuning utility, plus the thermal velocity boost, all those other things, that really allows you to get up to those really high clock speeds without burning down your solders on your board, right? And so it's pretty cool, and we actually just launched that as a cooler through Cooler Master late last year.
Okay, and well, okay, so clearly you are a that's interesting. You are like kind of like a gamer of all types, but you mentioned Counter Strike, and yet you're running these high end GPUs, and you want to hit 6 gigahertz. Like how many hundreds of frames per second are you trying to get in Counter Strike? Is like 300 or more? Like is that not enough?
300 or more, but I don't play on 4K on Counter Strike because I actually I still play on 1080p because it's like that right mix of smoothness plus size of reticle so that I can really kind of nail it, right. Today. Now I'm sure that as some of that technology gets a little better, I'll switch over to 4K. But for now, 1080p is where it's at, and where those graphics cards and that high end really kind of shines is in games like a Three Kingdoms and some of those other ones where when you're trying to march on a field with thousands of units and you want to see every blade of grass while you have your archers kind of going after these samurai, right? Like there's nothing like it, and that for that kind of stuff you need to crank it all the way up on those ultra settings.
Awesome. Well, so okay, so what got I'm interested in, you're a comic book fan, so I want to talk about origin stories, right? You talked about Street Fighter, but what was your first brush with gaming?
uh, well, that's a really easy answer. My friend down the street, when I was growing up, had a Nintendo. He was the first person on the block to have a Nintendo, and we all used to go over to his house because he had 3 games. He had the Mario slash Duck Hunt dual cartridge, right? He had the gold cartridge Zelda, which was like mind blowing, right? And we had Contra, right? And so we'd all take turns and we'd all play that way. And I realized then and there that this was probably going to be my life. And so, fast forward, I got my own console for the first time when I was in 3rd grade. It was a Christmas present. It was a Super Nintendo, and my brother and I stayed up playing UN Squadron and Street Fighter 2. Kind of back there again, and then now take that and translate it back into arcades, right? Then I used to again, I grew up in arcades and played all those games there, and so when I put all those things together, it was always consoles and arcades until my mom came home in the 6th grade with a PC, and I'll quickly share a very brief story. The she it was a I'll never forget. It was the GeoWorks operating system, right? It wasn't even Windows, and it was a compact computer that she got from CompUSA. So those are three things that don't exist anymore, right? Just to give you a sense, to age myself a little bit. And she came home the next day after she brought it home from work to find me in the middle of the floor with the parts of that PC scattered on the floor because I just needed to see how it worked. So I took it apart to figure out how it worked. And I didn't realize at the time that you can't actually work a PC if it's not together. And so I learned very quickly how to put a PC together, how to build my own computer under duress because my mom was going to kill me if I didn't put that computer back together. And so I put it back together. And when I did that, that was the first time that I got introduced to PC gaming. And so I played things like Star Control, and Scorched Earth, if you remember these games, right? And so I was playing those, and then that then got me into like text-based games, with Gemstone 3 and RuneScape, and EverQuest, when it started kind of going that route, Baldur's Gate, and those kind of RPG games. But all of that was like the beginning until Warcraft came out. And Warcraft changed my life. I loved where I spent when that came out, I probably spent 10 of my 24 hours a day playing Warcraft and then later Warcraft 2, StarCraft, all those games versus, the 1 or 2 hours a day I was spending on my console, right? That's when I really realized that PC gaming was really something special because you could play with friends across the world, although it was on dial-up internet at the time, right? You could play with friends who didn't sit next to you in these games that just had these rich visual experiences with all this control that you had. And so that's what really kind of brought me to the world.
Wow. We certainly have very similar origin stories. Same thing. I remember like a elementary school classmate of mine. He had an NES, and I went over there, and I wasn't sure what it was. I didn't go over specifically for that, but his dad brought one home, and I remember that he had this gun shooting at the TV,
Yep.
and not only ducks were falling, but he had that other game, Hogan's Alley, and
Hogan's Alley was great.
it was just amazing. I can't believe that you could like point something to the TV and something responds. And that was, it was obviously such a formative memory that, you and I both remember those
Yep.
very intense moments. So yeah, it wasn't long
Yep.
before, very thankful that my parents kind of gave in to my requests. And, I have, I got Contra as well. Still remember the Konami code, right? Get those 30 lives.
That's
Yep,
right. Above,
that's
down,
right.
left, right, B, A, B, A, start. That's right.
Exactly. And the same thing, PC gaming was kind of fun. There was no Nintendo at school, but they had, old Tandy computers. And that's when I discovered, wait a minute, you're playing games on those computers? And they had King's Quest, and that kind of got me into the
Yes.
more
King's Quest was
interesting.
great. Yes.
Yep. All those RPGs, and that was that was you know good gaming all over the place. So very,
And
very fond memories.
And if I could add to that just briefly, right? So, this is where games like Dungeon's Lair, right? You remember Dungeon's Lair,
Yeah.
and where you saw it in the arcade, where it was this great, cartoon kind of experience, and then you saw it on the computer, and it was like looked almost exactly right. But then when you try to translate that to the console, it just didn't do it, right? You just didn't get the same experience, right, on those, and I think that delta really that kind of shift. King's Quest was a great one. I mentioned Baldur's Gate and some of these other ones. Why PC gaming kind of just holds that special place in my heart, even though my first entry point to it was through the console.
Well, that's exactly right too. And I know that the worlds of console gaming and PC gaming are converging. But basically, when you want the best experience, the best frame rate, provided you get the hardware to do it, the best resolution, usually even those console games that are ported to PC, sometimes are really worth waiting for.
That's right. They absolutely are.
Yeah.
You're not going to find a console that's doing 300 frames per second. Doesn't matter how much you spend on it. It's not going to do it.
That's right. Or if you were ever playing, Counter Strike on a console, well, the only place you're going to really be able to find it today is on the PC.
Yeah. Have you tried to play PUBG on the console? It's just not. It's not awesome.
Well, so all these games. So you're still loyal to Counter Strike. Why not? Like you said, PUBG. Why is that not your main game?
I still play them. I'm loyal, I'm nostalgic, right? And so like Counter-Strike just hold that special place in my heart. Shooting somebody from across the screen with a jump spin with a scout just doesn't. There's no analog to that in PUBG, right? That said, right, I do still play some of those other ones, right? I love Call of Duty. The Call of Duty series, Modern Warfare, especially like that game, Modern Warfare 2, especially were great games. PUBG is a great one. I really enjoy Overwatch. Valorant is an incredible game, right? And I really enjoy playing that. But if you ask me what my favorite games are, I always go back to the nostalgia, which is why I'm still playing through Final Fantasy X again. I go back to Chrono Trigger, which is my favorite game ever, right? So like, I'm just I'm a sucker for nostalgia.
No, I'm just giving you a hard time. I'm the exact same way. I can go even further back. I think that and it comes back to time, right? How much time do you have to devote to games these days? When you're working in the industry, it's a little bit more difficult. But
yeah,
for me, if I had to pick my favorite time, it's absolutely the first Quake World when they had Quake that was optimized for LAN code, and then Quake World was optimized for dial up, really, right? And those are the best days. When 3D accelerated Quake came out too, that was Quake 1, Quake 2, Quake 2 Arena.
And I won't say exactly what I saw, but Duke Nukem 3D was I think the first person shooter I played on a PC when I was a kid. Not a great game to introduce to a tween boy at the time, but it was fantastic. And then I played that, Unreal, Quake. So yeah.
Yeah, hey, Duke Nukem, you got to kick ass and chew bubble gum and
kick ass, all out of bubble gum. That's right. All
right. Well, hey, on that note, I want to thank you for coming on Chip Chat. We've really talked about games. It's been a really enjoyable conversation. Of course, Rocket Lake. That's kind of the reason why we're having this episode today. I want to thank you for showing us and telling us everything about Rocket Lake.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And I didn't shill on Rocket Lake before. I promise. I really am going to go build a Rocket Lake system. But this is a shill now. This really cool package with the i9K. This is the Rocket Lake package. You'll be able to find it on shelves at the end of the month. So go pick one up.
All right, Marcus. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
That was my conversation with Marcus Kennedy, General Manager of the Gaming and eSports segment in Intel's PC business, and a true gamer who busted out the Konami code unprompted. Now, the central topic today was Rocket Lake. That's the 11th gen Intel Core desktop processor. It's got an all-new architecture called Cypress Cove, hitting desktop for the first time. This architecture has been running successfully on Intel's 10nm mobile chips and has been adapted for 14nm for Rocket Lake, which will go a long way in ensuring an adequate supply in the market. That new architecture brings up to a 19% IPC improvement, meaning that the CPU gets more work done every cycle, plus new features that accelerate artificial intelligence applications. It's got an all-new integrated graphics core too, which helps some of those new AI functions. Rocket Lake also brings with it many new overclocking features and even makes some high-end features like memory overclocking more widely available. Along with Rocket Lake comes a new 500 series chipsets for motherboard makers. The new platform brings tons of new capabilities, especially in the connectivity area with PCIe 4.0 on Rocket Lake CPUs, Wi-Fi 6, Thunderbolt 4, faster USB, among others. Now that was a lot. And there's a whole lot more coming up in the Chip Chat series. We're available on SoundCloud and other podcast platforms. The video version is available on YouTube on the Intel Technology channel. Thanks for tuning in to Chip Chat, and I'll see you in the next one.